His Excellency Mr. Paul Magnette, Minister for Climate and Energy of Belgium. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Dear friends, the clock is ticking. There are few of us left, and we're not making much progress. We're beginning to worry about this. Outside, people are getting worried. Those who are watching us as we work and make comments on our work are becoming more and more pessimistic. Copenhagen, they are saying, might well turn out to be a failure. Over the course of the last few days, we have wasted too much time looking for scapegoats, wasting time in procedures. We have 1 day and 2 nights left, and we have to spend each hour, every minute, trying to agree. No one in the world, no one would be able to actually comprehend that there's a failure. No one could understand that we have negotiated for 2 years, that we have brought together here in Copenhagen over 100 heads of state and government, hundreds of ministers, thousands of experts and diplomats, and that all of our efforts have led to nothing more than a deadlock. Nobody could understand when the expectations are enormous on all continents. Those who have met here, those who have raised so much hope by announcing that Copenhagen is taking place, those of us who represent a scale model of the world, we're incapable of agreeing. My country, Belgium, is not a large country. It would not attempt to dictate its laws to anyone. We have many friends in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, and in the Americas. We have spent a lot of time talking with our friends, and we measure the distance, sometimes enormous, that separate us, but we also know that in spite of our differences, we have a common vision. We know that Copenhagen carries with it a promise of a new economy, rich with a wealth of development for all, innovation and quality jobs, the promise of a new civilization, less of a consumer delegation, more respectful of the fragile balance of our cherished planet, and the promise of a new era in international relations where cooperation takes the place of rivalries and where solidarity takes the place of selfishness. We have all heard what the scientists have said, warning us. We are reminded by what Paul Valéry said at the dawn of the 20th century. We, civilizations, know that we are mortal. Not to be able, in the middle of all this clamor, to be able to come up with a global, equitable, ambitious, and comprehensive agreement, which as soon as possible would become legally binding for everyone, would be a political and moral mistake. In the best of worlds, a legally binding agreement would be the best multilateral response to climate change based on the architecture of the Kyoto Protocol, which has proved its importance, a single legally binding instrument equal to cover all the elements of the Bali Action. But we don't live in the best of worlds. We live in a real world, which is finite and imperfect. In this world, we will probably have a simple legal instrument, perhaps a combination of several supplementary legal instruments. Whatever the format, this legal instrument will have to ensure environmental integrity based on a shared and vision guided by science. The agreement will have to be balanced. Everyone will have to act according to their possibilities and responsibilities, but it will have to ensure environmental integrity over the long term, following the robust results of the IPCC, and this presupposes that the peak of our emissions will be attained as soon as possible, at the latest in 2020, and that our global emissions will be reduced by about 50%, at least 50% by 2050, compared with 1990 baseline. And since science is marching on, we also have to equip ourselves with the means to progress by including in our agreement a review clause, which makes it possible to take into account a complete review of the prospects on the basis of the fifth IPCC before 2016. Belgium and the EU have committed themselves unilaterally to reducing our emissions by 20% by 2020 compared to the 1990 levels. Today, we are ready to move to 30%, so long as the others come up with comparable commitments and adequate action. At this time, efforts announced are far from what science is recommending. If we don't move fast, Copenhagen will be very, very far from expressed collective ambitions. Time is moving on. We cannot wait until others show their cards, show their hand. We all have to raise our level of commitments. The target of the EU cannot alone match this challenge. All developed countries have to commit to comparable emission reductions, and emerging countries have to translate the very promising actions they announced before Copenhagen into legally binding agreements. All countries, except the least developed countries, must also contribute equitably to the cost of fighting climate change, in particular to benefit the least developed countries and the most vulnerable countries. We know, we, the industrialized countries, that we have made many mistakes, and we know that we carry a very heavy historic responsibility. We acknowledge this, and we want to break with this history based on domination and unreasonable exploitation of natural resources and unbridled consumption. This is the spirit of Copenhagen, a chance that we must seize, a unique opportunity to enter a new age. We all know that in order to achieve this transition, money will be needed, a lot of money. In parallel with public financing, the markets can also channel investments towards countries that require these, and we're ready to establish an effective financial mechanism through a high-level body under the management of the UNFCCC. We're also ready to confirm immediate and urgent, swift actions for the financing over the short term. These means should be mainly devoted to building indispensable capacities for adaptation and mitigation, including the RED Plus mechanism, and in particular in the least developed countries. We also know how important and precious our forests are. The largest ones, the richest ones, those which are the lungs of our cherished little Earth, are in danger. And while belonging to the countries that host them, they are the universal heritage. We're ready to commit to the conservation of the forest, in particular in countries such as the Congo Basin, which we are so deeply attached to, and which must be rewarded for having maintained their forests. Dear friends, at this very late hour, after days and weeks of very difficult negotiations, we might be tempted to move and shift towards pessimism, to give up. However, we're so close to our goal. Now, there are numerous differences in the texts, many hours. It will take many hours. There are all sorts of square brackets all over the text which reflect differences of view and conflicts of interests which are far from being negligible. But the most difficult things have actually been done. We've all been able to acknowledge the scourge of the perturbations on the climate after decades of scientific controversy. We've been able to act together. We have a language, a common language. We have been able to invent great mechanisms that will allow us, after Copenhagen, to resolutely embark on a new era. We know what the possibilities and the difficulties of one and all are. In the light of all of the ground we have already covered, the obstacles that still remain to be overcome are really not all that significant. If we would stop right now, so close to a goal that we all share, would be a huge waste. All we need is a few hours. All we need is to think together, ponder together, a few moves by each of the parties, and Copenhagen will become part of history. Not everything will be decided in the next few hours. A lot of work will remain after Copenhagen. Belgium will have the honor of presiding over the European Union in the second semester of 2010 during the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Mexico, where we shall all be meeting. The last time we presided over the EU in 2001, we contributed to the results of the two COPs, COP6 bis and COP7, which led to the adoptions of the Marrakesh agreements. And today, we're happy once again to be working with all of you throughout 2010 in order to give a final form to the agreement that I am sure we will be able to reach here in Copenhagen in the next few hours. And in 10 years, in 20 years, perhaps our paths will cross again in another conference somewhere, and we will be able to say to one another with that small gleam of pride in our eyes, "You remember Copenhagen? What a magnificent victory it was." I thank you.